What would you do if your son gave you a coffin as a gift? A question that sounds like a nightmare in the West, but in China, for centuries, it was the highest expression of respect and gratitude. It wasn't a bad omen, it was a wish for long life and the belief that the coffin brought good fortune and kept death away. A coffin that could spend years, even decades, stored inside the home of the person who would one day use it. This is the story of a tradition that lasted more than 2,000 years, survived dynasties, wars, and famines, and was wiped off the map in just a few decades by government decree. To understand why a coffin was a welcome gift, you need to understand something about Mandarin Chinese. In Chinese, coffin is pronounced guansai, and those same syllables, with a slightly different tone, mean something completely different. To rise as an official and accumulate wealth, the same sound, two opposite meanings. In a culture where words and sounds carry enormous symbolic weight, that coincidence was no small thing. The coffin didn't evoke death. It evoked success, advancement, prosperity. That's why it was also called shou tsai, the longevity coffin. It wasn't an object that announced the end, but one that, according to popular belief, delayed it. The tradition didn't appear overnight. Its roots go back to the Zhou dynasty, more than 1,000 years before Christ. At that time, burial in a coffin was already codified as part of the state's official rituals. It wasn't a personal choice, it was a moral obligation. Confucianism taught that the body was a gift from one's parents and had to be treated with the utmost respect. To burn it, to damage it, was unthinkable. During the Qin and Han dynasties, that idea became firmly established. Preparing a proper burial for one's parents became one of the most important acts a son could perform. Failing to do so was a moral failing, a public disgrace. But at that point, preparing the coffin in advance was still something reserved for the elite. Emperors, nobles, officials, people with the resources and the time to think about such things. The big change would come later. What forced that change was something no one expected: religion. Buddhism had arrived in China from India centuries earlier, and with it came a practice completely foreign to Chinese tradition: cremation. Buddha had been cremated, and his followers began doing the same. At first, it was a minority practice, reserved for monks and devoted followers. But during the Song dynasty, between the 10th and 13th centuries, something shifted. Cremation began to gain ground among ordinary people, especially in the south of the country. The reasons were practical. Southern China was densely populated, and land was scarce. A burial took up space, cremation did not, and it was cheaper. It is estimated that in some parts of the South, up to 40% of the population had adopted cremation. Confucian intellectuals protested. They called cremation a barbaric practice, a violation of filial piety. But their criticism wasn't enough to stop it. That would require something far more decisive. If you're enjoying this content, like and subscribe so more people can discover these traditions. In 1368, the son of a peasant family seized control of China and founded the Ming dynasty. His name was Zhu Yuanzhang, known as the Hongwu Emperor, and one of his first decisions was to ban cremation. It wasn't a suggestion, it was a decree. Burning a family member's body was punishable by prison and fines. Cremation, which had been gaining ground for centuries, vanished overnight. But the ban wasn't just an act of control. It was also the moment when the longevity coffin tradition stopped being a custom of the elite and became the norm for all of Chinese society. With no legal alternative, every family, from the humblest peasants to the most powerful officials, needed a coffin. And preparing one in advance made sense. It was a way to save, to plan, to show that children were fulfilling their duty. The Qing dynasty maintained the ban without changes, and it was during this period that the tradition reached its most elaborate and regulated form. The state didn't just require burial, it regulated it in detail. The wood used for the coffin depended on your social class. Peasants used pine or willow. Officials used cypress or fir. Only the imperial family could use golden nanmu, a wood so precious it was reserved by law for the throne. The thickness, the size, the colors, the decoration, everything was codified. A coffin too luxurious for your rank was an offense against the social order. And the differences weren't just about wood. In the north, coffins were dark red or black. In the south, bright red with gold. In central China, it was common to find them engraved in gold, with wishes for longevity. When the carpenter finished his work, the family didn't mourn. They celebrated. A banquet was organized. The children wore red. Pastries and coins were handed out to the neighbors. The coffin arrived at the house and stayed. In an empty room in the barn, sometimes hung from the ceiling, to protect it from moisture. Every year, on the elder's birthday or during the Qingming festival, it was taken out, cleaned, and given a fresh coat of red or black lacquer. It was believed that having it in the house kept death away. That death, upon seeing the coffin was already prepared, would grow bored and move on. It was a household object, like any other, until the day it was needed. And the tradition made no distinction between ranks. In 1894, Empress Dowager Cixi commissioned her own coffin years in advance. A block of golden nanmu weighing more than 2,000 kilos, requiring over 100 carpenters working for 3 years. If even the most powerful woman in China ordered her coffin while still alive, the message was clear. This was no eccentricity. It was an obligation. For centuries, the longevity coffin had been a certainty, an inevitable part of Chinese family life. But in 1949, everything changed. The People's Republic of China was born with a clear agenda: to modernize the country and erase what it called feudal and superstitious customs. Traditional funerals were on that list. The government didn't ban the coffin overnight. What it did was something far more effective. It actively promoted cremation as the modern, rational, and patriotic choice. Funeral homes were nationalized. Official education pushed the new model, and party members led by example. The message was clear: burying the dead in coffins was a waste of wood and land. China was a country under construction. Resources could not be buried. The numbers tell the story better than any speech. In 1986, 26% of Chinese were cremated. By 2021, that figure had risen to 58%. In just a few decades, a 2,000-year-old tradition had been reduced to a rarity. Today it survives only in a few rural corners, kept alive by a handful of families who refuse to let it go. For most people, especially the younger generations, the longevity coffin is something distant, a story their grandparents tell and they listen to with curiosity. A tradition that survived empires and was erased not by the passage of time, but by a political decision. Perhaps the most striking thing about this story is not that the tradition existed, but what it reveals about the vision a culture can have of life and death. If this story made you think, there are many more like it waiting. China has centuries of traditions that never make the headlines. What other traditions would you like us to explore? Let us know in the comments. See you in the next one.